I think it's fair to say last year when we were together, we were in a kind of collective shock and horror at what had passed in our country right before our eyes. The triumph of a president and subsequently an administration that has moved far faster and far more destructively than we could have imagined. So we come together again this afternoon to think together about resistance, resilience, and creativity in light of this and many other difficulties in our world. In the face of increasingly dangerous geopolitical situations, increasingly unjust economic structures, increasingly unsafe ecological situations, and an increasingly more racist, sexist, and xenophobic social situation. Thank you for being here. Your mere presence is a source of strength for the rest of us, and your active participation in this network and many others of which you are a part are steps in the direction of resistance, resilience, and creativity. Let me welcome you on behalf of WATER, the Women's Alliance for Theology, Ethics, and Ritual, for being here for what is our 21st meeting, Elizabeth, our 21st meeting of the Feminist Liberation Theologians Network. This network began in 1995. We have been meeting at the annual meetings of the AAR SBL since 1997 in San Francisco, and we have been meeting faithfully and I think fruitfully until now, this 21st meeting. We also have a Google list which we use to send out information during the year, and we have a sign-up sheet. Where is Wendy with the sign-up sheet? Wendy, they're going around. Please sign up. Even if you're on the list, sign up so we can double-check your new email that you've forgotten to give us so that we can get you information. And please feel free to use that Google list to post to it with things that you think would be relevant to our larger community. You'll find on your chair, or if there isn't one, we'll get you one, a WATER newsletter. WATER is the sponsor for this group, and we're delighted to have your support for WATER so that these kinds of events can take place. In recent years, we've taken a look in this network at feminist, liberation, and theology, each by itself. And together, we've looked at gender-based violence and how we can eradicate it. And last year, we looked at the question of agitating boundaries, intersectionality, and political action that resulted in some very interesting conversation. Once again, this year, we're happy to have the collaboration of the Women's Caucus. They will continue today's discussion. Elizabeth is here. Who else is here from the Women's Caucus? Some of the other speakers, Teresa, Elaine, great, Shannon. Please, Shannon, there are chairs. There's one here, and there's one over here. Hisako, if you want to. The Women's Caucus will continue this discussion tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, from 9 to 11, in the Women's Lounge, which is, in fact, in room 305. Room 305. And they will be looking, which is on the third level of this building, and they will be looking at resistance and resilience with a report from this meeting to start off, but then followed by papers from some of their colleagues on themes related to resistance and resilience. So I highly recommend that tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock you join us for that session. I look forward to it. And it's this wonderful collaboration, I think, once again, between the caucus and the Feminist Liberation Theologians Network. So let us proceed with our content today. And this is a place where you actually meet people at the AAR. I know that's a concept that is difficult for some to imagine, but this is a place to meet people. And so one of the things that we do here as part of the regular schedule is that we each introduce ourselves. And I know you look around and say, oh no, come on, don't. It's very brief. Then after each person introduces him, her, or their self, we will turn to Elizabeth Schussler-Fiorenza, who will introduce our three speakers. And then our speakers will have an opportunity to address our topic, after which we will have an opportunity to meet with each other in small groups. Yet another chance to meet people. I'm just emphasizing something here because it may be the only time this weekend where that happens for you outside of a bar. But if you go to most AAR sessions where you look at the backs of people's heads, you will come to appreciate by about Sunday afternoon what this is like. So Sylvia, welcome, come in. There's a chair over here. We are delighted that this is an opportunity to actually act like human beings with each other doing this work and not simply getting the kind of banking approach that those people take to the AAR. So with that, we will come back from the small groups for a very short plenary where people will give us some highlights of things they have discussed, particularly with regard to resistance, resilience, and creativity. And then we will be on our way at 6 o'clock to the next important event on your agenda, which I hope includes something enjoyable of a social sort. Okay? So I'm again delighted that you're here, and I appreciate so much the willingness of our panelists to give us their expertise in this situation. And I'd like to begin the introductions, and then I'm going to go to my left, and we'll go around, and it's quick. Okay, this is not your dissertation or your comps or your Christmas card list. This is just something about you and a way in which you have resisted of late. A way in which you have resisted. My name is Mary Hunt. I work at WATER, the Women's Alliance for Theology, Ethics, and Ritual in Silver Spring, Maryland. One of my acts of resistance was not only to march in the Women's March in Washington, but also to write a piece for a forthcoming collection by a number of women from a variety of settings who also see being in the streets as something we need to be doing these days.
I'm Elizabeth Schuster-Fiorenza, and I am here, and I'm resisting all the time in terms of what I'm doing. But I want to mention that the Feminist Studies in Religion has a new big book series which we would like to use for resisting ends.
I'm Jane Redmont. I am a congregational consultant for the Episcopal Diocese of Massachusetts and a freelance coach and editor if you're writing a theological book. I'm your handholder and editor. You're a little mine. And I also, I missed this last year. I just spent a year and a half caring for my parents at the end of their lives, and that was a profound time for me, and so I'm also digesting that and writing a memoir about that. Turned 65 shortly after my parents' death, so I'm sort of going, what? So I'm interested in resisting with great hope.
Thanks, Jane.
My name is Lorraine Armont. The way I've been resisting is I run an organization about analyzing what biblical womanhood means for women across denominations. And so I asked that question to women.
I'm Denise Starkey. I'm a professor at the College of St. Scholastica, and I just resigned as chair of the theology department and am now the director of women's and gender studies, and that's how I'm resisting by getting the whole new generation all pissed off.
I'm Catherine Bailey. I'm on the board of Faith Trust Institute and associated with Christian Feminism Today, and participating in my resistance through those two organizations, but also have gotten much more involved in my neighborhood community governance also.
Thank you. Let's go back here.
I'm Jennifer Bird. I'm an adjunct at University of Portland and the community college system there, and doing lots of other things as well as pay bills. And the way I'm resisting right now is having conversations with congregations and groups of people about marriage in the Bible as one piece of the larger conversation about same-sex marriage. Seems to me, and I noticed something that came out from WATER recently along these lines, but I'm interested in helping people sit down and look at passages together so that they sit with them, they work through them themselves instead of just reading what someone tells them it says, so that they can have, in community, they can have a productive conversation about it. So I've started offering that workshop on the side.
Thanks, Jen.
In your spare time. In my spare time. Yes.
Hisako from Japan, teaching at seminaries and working with Asian women in Asian countries. I have so much I want to tell, but that's all. Oh, one thing. I am finally invited by the Male Scholars Group to speak about feminist theology in the 21st century after 25 years of doing feminist theology in Japan.
Congratulations, she persevered. Welcome.
I'm Jane Frederickson, the Executive Director of Faith Trust Institute, and that in itself, the day-to-day work is working resistance.
I'm Marie Fortune. I'm the founder and
senior analyst at Faith Trust Institute located in Seattle. I live in Pleasant Hill, Tennessee, and one of my current acts of resistance is I knit pussy hats. This is what I'm doing.
Let me just take a moment to say that yesterday many of us had the privilege to be at the 40th anniversary celebration of the Faith Trust Institute and honoring its founding director, Mary Marshall Fortune. And it was really a magnificent experience to see how a group has persevered and resisted and been very creative over 40 years. So I want to offer a round of applause to them. Staff, board, put your hands up. Staff, board of that group. Yeah, staff, board, funders. Yeah, very good. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Ann?
I'm Ann Ganley, and I am the wife of this woman here. This is my first AR. I'm a psychologist, and I moved for retirement to Pleasant Hill, Tennessee, a town of 516 people. That is a daily act of resistance.
Good to have you with us, Ann. Welcome.
My name is Glenna Shepherd. I'm a minister in the United Church of Christ, and I serve as the pastor of Pleasant Hill Community Church, United Church of Christ, and every Sunday I preach feminist, liberationist sermons in the hills of Tennessee, and that's my
Great. Em?
I'm Emily Cohen, with Faith Trust and a former water intern. And my resistance is through Faith Trust, but specifically addressing abuse in Buddhist communities.
I'm Shannon Clarkson, and on Wednesday I demonstrated at the Anti-Defamation League because they're sending police to Israel for training. And then on Thursday I demonstrated with the people in New Haven on DACA. And on Friday last Friday went to the lawyer's office. We're becoming a model for the rest of the United States on how to accompany undocumented people who are trying to not be put on planes. And so far we've been successful with our last 3 cases.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I'm Fulata Moyo. I work with the World Council of Churches, and the act of resistance every day it is, but I'm responsible for gender and women program, and recently we've done 2 things. The first was after 39 years, we were able to have a meeting on the ordination of women in the ecumenical movement. And we are still waiting for the response. And the second is that we have just had recommendations that hold the whole WCC constituency accountable to some issues that they need to address when it comes to involvement of women, their participation and perspective to ecumenical growth.
Thank you.
I'm Elaine Nogueira Godsi. I'm an assistant professor in theology, ecology, and race in the Methodist Theological School in Ohio. This week's making 1 year since I moved to the United States. My family and I, we come from South Africa, though I'm Brazilian. And in this first year, I have taught 3 courses in the school. One is on ecofeminist liberation theology, and the other one on gender and theology. And I found out that it's way more difficult to teach on gender and theology in a United Methodist Seminary in Ohio than teach about ecology. It's very hard for people to hear about feminist theology from a woman that has a strong accent and comes from Latin America. So I can live every day the nature of my job, working on theology and race, and teaching those men that are going to become the next pastor's generation about gender and theology. It has been a form of resistance. I have been turning my dissertation into my book, which is on the ecofeminist liberation theology of Yvonne Gebara, which is Gebara, not Guevara. But I also learned that people say Gebara here. And thank you.
Thank you. Marianne, welcome.
Hi, I'm Marianne Nutty-Burke. I'm the Executive Director of Dignity USA, Catholics committed to LGBTQI equality. So again, daily work. But one of the most joyful acts of resistance we've had this year is we've established a partnership with a group called Freedom in Rome, Uganda, which is a group headed by lesbian, bisexual, and transgender women of faith in Uganda who work on both LGBTQI issues as well as women's reproductive issues and education for girls. So working with them has really been very eye-opening and feels really good in this climate.
I'm Betsy Shirley. I work on the editorial staff at Sojourners Magazine, a magazine of faith and social justice. We do a lot on our magazine about resistance. In fact, we got to the point this year where we said we can't use the word resistance on our cover anymore. We have to come up with different ways to say that. So let me know if you have suggestions. I think, but personally, my active resistance has been getting involved with my church's sanctuary network in DC and a lot of the work that's being done to protect those who have document and stand with them.
I'm Meredith Minister. I teach at Shenandoah University in Winchester, Virginia. And I guess my latest act of resistance has been refusing to die in the wake of a usually terminal diagnosis that I received in March.
I'm Silvia Marcos. I'm coming from Mexico. And we just organized a Feminist Liberation Theology meeting, hoping to be able to involve the perspectives of indigenous women. One of them, Maria de Jesus Patricio, this is unthinkable in Mexico, but we have now a candidate for the presidency of Mexico that is an indigenous woman. So I'm working very much close to her and to the people that are supporting her. And this is Indian theology and feminist theology, so it's just trying to work on those perspectives.
Let's go to the back row.
Hi, I'm Karen Salisbury White. I'm coming from the University of Ottawa. I work on femme fatale and dangerous women in biblical narratives, and I love anything having to do with any kind of woman who embraces power and disembodiment in any kind of way. So I'm a new doctoral student looking to meet people, and I'm really glad to be here.
My name is Robert Drake, and my act of resistance is to have just been 1 week ago ordained in PCUSA as a gay married man. I can tell you through the church search that was difficult. And akin to someone else down over there who said this, I am also resisting by having lived most of my life in smaller towns in the Midwest and one small town in Georgia, and currently live with my husband in a 3,000 person central Minnesota farming town. Welcome.
I am Hannah Hoffheim, so I'm a teacher and a theologian, and my acts of resistance right now are the quiet sort. The moments of teaching where you refuse to let a student forget their full humanity or walk away from the hard questions, or sitting at my computer writing, unsure where those words will go, but trusting that those quiet moments sometimes are the ones that lead somewhere.
My name is Yongnavi, a doctoral student in Religion, Gender, and Culture program at Harvard Divinity School. I'm doing ethnography work in Bible study groups chaired by female pastors in Korean and Korean immigrant churches. So now I am learning how Bible study from feminist perspective can be transforming resistance.
I'm Nancy Pineda Madrid, and I teach at Boston College. I'm a theologian there. And my acts of resistance, much of my research has to do with violence against women and how to, the resistance movements that have emerged out of that, so to bring that to visibility. And this week, one act of resistance that I engaged in my Christology class, I devoted a session to LGBTQ questions, which is not something that happens in the school that I'm at. So that was an act of resistance.
My name is Elaine Hogan. I'm
from Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm a lecturer at Trinity Methodist College. My most recent act of resistance was collating a 3-volume series on rape, culture, gender violence and religion, and fingers crossed it'll be out in February. So.
With who? Who's publishing it?
Sorry, what?
Who's publishing it?
Palgrave.
I'm Renate Joost, and I'm from Germany, and I'm a professor for feminist theology there. And my act of resistance is having worked as a feminist theologian for 40 years now.
My name is David Smith. I'm a pastor at Bryn Mawr Presbyterian Church, and my act of resistance is continuing to raise up the 275 youth under my care in a community that will accept them no matter who they are, period. And I also have the privilege this summer of being in Germany at the World Community of Reformed Churches gathering, where we called all of our member churches to ordain women within the next 7 years.
I'm Colleen Hartung, and I am the developer and coordinator for Ministries to Families and Children at Holy Wisdom Monastery in Madison, Wisconsin. And my act of resistance, well, one, is that I did go to the Women's March, and I am doing a presentation tomorrow morning at the Women's Caucus thing on pussy hats and anatomical signage. And I'm from Wisconsin, and I have to admit that even though I worked my heart and every other part of my body out in the last presidential election, I do feel like I let the, not just the United States down, but the world down. Anyway, I was a political organizer, but have become more of a political organizer in my local community and across the state. So hopefully.
Thank you.
I'm Mary Louise Stone. I live in New Mexico. I lived for a number of years in Peru and Bolivia, and completed my doctorate on Pachamama and women's roles, and I would like to turn that into a book. So that's something I did and will do.
Janice, what would you do?
My name is Janice Poss. I'm a doctoral student at Claremont Graduate University, and my act of resistance is being a feminist in the Roman Catholic Church.
Amen. I'm Alicia Pamaniban. I'm a graduate student from Princeton Theological Seminary. My current research would be the uniqueness of the Hebrew Bible special provision for the foreign resident to have equal rights as a citizen.
Hi, I'm Kelly Stewart. I'm a PhD student down at Vanderbilt, where I focus mostly on issues around beliefs about suffering and sacrifice in theology and domestic and sexual violence, particularly against women and girls.
I'm Nancy Corcoran. I'm a sister of St. Joseph Crondelet. So I'm still in the church, so that's my one act of resistance. And the other one is I'm a chaplain to transgender, gender nonconforming, expanding, intersex folks in St. Louis, Missouri.
I'm Liz Dowling. I'm a biblical scholar from Australia, and I read the biblical text with eco-feminist eyes, and I introduce others to using them as well.
I'm Tracy McEwen. I'm also from Australia. I'm a PhD student, and I guess my active resistance is staying in the Catholic Church as well. In Australia, we've just recently had a plebiscite on same-sex marriage, which has been, the Catholic bishops have spoken very strongly against, not all of them, but the voice has been loud, and so just quietly speaking against that within the church has been an act of resistance.
I'm Coralie Ling, and I'm also from Australia, and I've been weaving rainbow circles within the congregations where I'm retired, but I still take services, so my last few services have all been weaving rainbow circles, and I still have work to do in my church, Uniting Church, because we haven't yet approved of the marriage of LGBTIQ people.
I'm Gabrielle Ferrazzini from Switzerland. I'm a retired teacher for children and grown-ups with special needs, and I think I am an activist now. So I knit pussy hats, and I'm interested in urban gardenings, which I practice. and I am here with Elizabeth, my partner.
Elizabeth, I'm Catholic theologian. I worked in Switzerland for the movement of the Girl Scouts. And for the conference international of the Catholic Girl Scouts. I worked as editor for a print media for Swiss Missionary Society, who was related with Zimbabwe, which is actual now. And the last 14 years I was pastor in hospitals and homes for disabled people, for people with Alzheimer's disease, etc.
Welcome, and thanks for your blog, which I always appreciate too.
Hello, I'm Elizabeth Ersick, and I think one act of resistance, Marie, I came in too late. I just love you, and I love Mary and Elizabeth and everybody here.
That's an act of resistance.
Yeah. My act of resistance is to continue to co-chair the Women's Caucus, to make a space for it here and provide a welcoming and networking opportunity. And the kinds of things that have happened in the past couple years, we now do a session where we publicize books that are being published on gender and religion. We, this year, are coming out with a film with some of the people that are here in the room of the foremothers of feminist theology, and we're partnering with the Religion and Film Group, again, kind of reaching out beyond our kind of section. And just recently, I was appointed to the board of the Parliament of World Religions at a time when only 30 on the board, there were only 4 women. I'm now in charge of the women's programming. We are doing a session tomorrow at 11:45 in the Women's Lounge. If you'd be interested in helping, it'll be in Toronto in 2018. We expect 10,000 people to come to it, and we have 70 sections. We are open for women's programming, so please consider that. The Women's Caucus is actually our act of resistance in bridging out to the popular audience. We want to put 1,000 new entries of women's contribution to religion into Wikipedia. And we are doing a more scholarly take also in Wikipedia, where we're forming scholars to write short blurbs to go in on the dignity of women in Islam, in Christianity, in these things. And that will be translated across all the world's languages. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm mindful of our time, so we ask people to be as brief as we can, just your name and an act of resistance, so we can get through to everyone and then get our speakers. So thank you.
Hi, my name is Leah Valentine. I'm from Canada. I studied at Queen's University. I studied trauma and theology, and my act of resistance is resisting domestic violence as a mother, as a poet, and an educator, specifically on how affect theory, pneumatology, and domestic violence coexist.
Thank you.
I'm Inna Nord from Germany, professor of practical theology and religious education at Würzburg University. And I try to educate our students in feminist theology, integrating this in discussions of inclusion and religious diversity. These are the prominent topics at the moment in the German debate, and my act of resistance is not to leave out this perspective, instead of having female students who are not familiar with the gender topic.
Thank you. Welcome.
My name is Drew Kono. I am the Director of Communications and LGBTQ programs at the Religious Institute. And my act of resistance is in that capacity, working with women and queer people to share their stories, and particularly in editing, helping them sort of locate their arguments and find their voices.
My name is Callie McCauley. I'm a second-year doctoral student at Yale University. My act of resistance is in parenting a 7-year-old and resisting the normative claims and concepts that are transmitted to her.
My name is Emily Casey, and I work on staff at Yale Divinity School as a liturgical minister, and I resist by creating worship that sustains women.
My name is Wendy Millette. I'm a former intern at Water and now a student at Yale Divinity School in theology. And my act of resistance is working on unionizing students to make Yale a place that is more supportive of the scholarship of students of color, women, and queer students.
Daniela Lucia Rapisarda. I've just finished with a PhD at MF, Norwegian School of Theology. I work on theologies that support women's participation in peace work.
I'm Renate Rose, and my act of resistance is I'm active in the peace movement, especially to restrict the president's ability to launch a nuclear strike. Most people are not aware how dangerous this can be with a president that is so unstable, to say the least. We are especially working with Ed Markey, our senator, to get a bill through the Senate and the House to restrict that power, and also to restrict the demands that they want to spend more than $1 trillion on renewing our nuclear arsenal, when the Benn Treaty of the United Nations has just been opened for signing on the 20th of September. So most people are not aware how important this is.
Susan Wilhock, and I teach at Atlantic School of Theology in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and I teach and research on female child soldiering.
I'm Kathy McCallie. I teach at Phillips Theological Seminary in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I teach social ethics. My acts of resistance are that I stay in the church, I'm a UCC pastor, I'm a queer activist, and a community organizer.
My name is Teresa Uglar. I'm a visiting professor at Loyola Marymount University, and my act of resistance is helping my students to critique U.S. politics, but understanding how Western and non-Western epistemologies are affecting the way that we treat the earth.
My name is Phoebe Knopf. I'm a local writer, activist, faith-based person, and I love working on ending domestic violence and immigration justice and peace building. And my most recent act of resistance was calling Senator Markey to thank him for initiating the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, starting to meet this past Tuesday, to put limits, as Renata was saying, on any president, to make it impossible for any one president to initiate a first strike.
Thanks, Judy. Welcome.
I'm Veronica Lawson. I'm a Sister of Mercy from Australia, and I try to resist in as many ways as I possibly can. But in the last few years, I've belonged to a group called Frogs. We are friends of grandmothers against children in detention, and that takes a fair amount of our time.
Wonderful.
Michael Carlberg, professor at Western Washington University in critical media studies and social change theory. One thing I do is voluntarily teach online and underground university in Iran, organized by a repressed minority, the Baha'is there, who have been demonstrating constructive resilience for 150 years, which I'll be talking about tomorrow morning.
My name is Julia Berger. I'm a doctoral student at the University of Kent in Canterbury, UK. I study religious organizations at the United Nations with a particular focus on the Baha'i international community with the UN, and a more specific focus on its work in human rights and gender equality. And I don't think of my acts in terms of resistance. I'm going to resist resistance and say I try to work on bringing people together in our community to communicate across all the different boundaries that divide us politically, socially, and economically.
We always begin water programs now, and at least in the last year we've begun every water program by saying that our work is not in fact simply to share ideas, but in fact it is to make change. So let me underscore that as we turn to our speakers. Elizabeth Schuster-Fiorenza will make the introductions, and Nami Kim will settle herself and join us for welcome, Nami. Elizabeth, could you introduce our speakers, please?
I am happy to introduce my colleagues and friends here, but before I do so, I want to invite all of you to come tonight between 6 and 8 to the Feminist Studies in Religion Forum, which is in the Westin Copley Place, Hilton. And especially afterwards, also to the reception, which is also in the Westin Hilton, Copley. I'm happy to introduce Christine Pei, who is Associate Professor of Religion, Ethics, and Chair of the Religion Department at Denison University. She's also affiliated with the College in Women's and Gender Studies and Queer Studies programs. Christina teaches and writes about faith-based women's activism against US military imperialism. And she also writes on feminist ethics of peace and war. My friend, Professor Elaine Wainwright, is Professor Emerita at the University of Auckland, where she spent 13 years as head of the School of Theology. Prior to that, she lectured intensively in feminist theology, biblical studies in Australia, establishing with others the Women's Scholars of Religion and Theology. Currently, she is co-writing the commentary on the Gospel of Matthew in the Wisdom Commentary series, and I hope you all have had a look at the commentary series, and has recently published the Earth Bible Commentary on Matthew. Last but not least, I want to welcome Sharon Welch, who is the author of a new book coming out, After the Protests Are Heard, An Ethic of Power, Professionalism, and Risk. The book will appear in New York University Press. She has written 5 books in the field of social ethics and is currently a faculty member at the Unitarian Universalist School of Theology in Chicago. Sharon also has served on faculties at the University of Missouri, Columbia, and was my colleague at Harvard University Divinity School. While at the University of Missouri, she served time as Director of Women's Studies, Chair of the Department of Religion, and adjunct faculty in the College of Education, working with an interdisciplinary team on multicultural education. We will hear Christine Pei on feminist spiritual activism in the militarized world. Elaine will talk on what sustains us for the long journey of resistance, resilience, and creativity. And Sharon will speak about the soul of democracy. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. I always like to add my short biography that I'm also ordained Episcopal priest. And I'm the first Korean international woman who was ordained in the U.S. Episcopal Church. So I always proudly introduce myself as a priest. So in the wake of news that North Korea successfully miniaturized a nuclear warhead to fit into an intercontinental ballistic missile, President Donald Trump said, North Korea best not make any more threats to the United States. They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen before. Since then, Trump's rhetoric toward North Korea has revived around fire and fury. However, Trump, and perhaps most Americans might forget that the entire Korean peninsula experienced America's fire and fury more than 60 years ago. The Korean War from 1950 to 1953 is conveniently known as the Forgotten War in the United States. During this Forgotten War, U.S. troops committed more than 60 reported massacres of Korean civilians, dropped 32,357 tons of napalms, stray-fed along with the saturation bombing, and raped local Korean women or both the women's sex. The U.S. military bases in South Korea are the signifier of the ongoing Korean War. The war has never ended. Around these bases, entertaining camp towns where American soldiers seek out women and alcohol have been the arbitrary borderlands between the United States and South Korea. Camp towns were systematically built and managed by the Korean government to satiate American soldiers' sexual desires and recreational needs. The U.S. armed forces in South Korea welcomed camp town prostitution for the sake of controlling venereal disease among the soldiers. So the United States always fought two kinds of wars whenever they went to war: venereal disease and real war. The Korean prostitutes who cater to American soldiers in camp towns are pejoratively called Western princess. The Western princesses' sexualized and militarized labor was the backbone of U.S.-Korea relations, construction of Korean America, and the economic development of South Korea, although these women have taken all the blames for corrupting sexual morality in South Korea. So when I heard President Trump verbally attacking North Korea, which sounds very similar to President George W. Bush's calling North Korea an axis of evil, I felt angry and depressed. Not because I was worried about a possible war in Korea, but because the United States keeps denying its role in threatening genuine security in the world and East Asia in particular. However, I try not to hate or demonize the warmongers and Donald Trump because of the spiritual activism that I learned from Western princesses. Through their sexualized labor, these women have the intimate knowledge of U.S. military imperialism constructed at the cost of colonized women's bodies. Spiritual activism, according to Gloria and Saldua, is spirituality for social change, the radically inclusionary politics. Although spiritual activism begins at the level of the personal, it combines self-reflection and self-growth with outward-directed, compassionate acts designed to bring about material change. Anzaldua's spiritual activism is rooted in both a feminist belief in interconnectedness between the personal and the political, and a religiously holistic view on interrelationality among all living beings. The recognition of the radical interrelationality does not allow for the dichotomy between the body and spirit, or the dichotomy between the victims and the victimizers. These crucial aspects of Ansar Dua's spiritual activism are seen through the Sunni Center activism in the Anjeongni camp town next to Camp Humphreys and Camp K6, where the 45th recently visited. The Sunni Center began as the gathering place for the old Western princesses who continued to live in camp towns even after they could no longer perform sexualized labor. And Christian faith, not as an institutionalized religion, has played an important role at this center. As local Christian volunteers visit the center, the senior women asked these volunteers to sing Christian hymns with them and pray for them. These Western princesses have memories of attending the church with their GI lovers while being shunned by the church. With the Christian volunteers at the center, the Western princesses create new memories of the church. The women also share their understanding of the biblical narratives based on their experience with camptown prostitution and a Christian God. Although the center is not a faith-based organization, it becomes to embody Christian faith of its own. In 2014, based on their stories, the Sunni Center women presented 2 plays to the public, The Story of Sukja, performed by the Center women, and The Village of 7 Houses, performed by professional actors and actresses. The former was born out of the Center women's healing journey through acting out their previous lives in Camptown prostitution. So performing their own lives, the women started seeing their bodies differently, not as something only useful for prostitution, but as the flesh with the souls that can feel and express sorrow, love, joy, and tears. Since they intentionally separated their body from their mind to survive suffering, the healing play gave them the opportunity to reflect on their bodily experience rather than forgetting or hiding it. After 1-year-long sessions of the healing play, the Western princesses decided to perform the play at a local theater to communicate with the public audience and to raise awareness of Camptown prostitution. Last summer, the Sunni Center women performed a musical titled Jukebox. In this musical, the women revealed themselves by singing the songs that they used to sing with their GI lovers. Although Western princesses do not know the whereabouts of their ex-lovers now, they remember the love that once brightened their lives. However, they do not romanticize Camptown prostitution or horrible violence committed by GI clients. Instead, the Western princesses try to show the complex power structures inside Camptown and their survivor wisdom by embracing their life as it is. The Village of 7 Houses was a collaborative work of the Sunni Center women and outside activists. Yang Ri, the director and writer of the play, is a long-time volunteer worker at the Sunni Center and social activist in Camptown. After he encountered the lonely death of an old Western princess, he began writing the play. And during my interview with Lee, he shared the image of God that emerged from the faces of Western princesses. So this is his words. A Western princess's lonely death tells me a certain truth about life. In my play, a dying elderly Western princess asked Hannah from the United States, who researches Camptown prostitution, to pray for her. As Hannah hesitates, the woman says, "When you pray for me, my tears flow into your eyes and yours into God's eyes. God is the one whose eyes are full of tears." So Lee's image of a God with eyes full of tears perhaps represents the physical expression of God's empathy toward the victims of deadly militarism. Religious rituals such as prayers may create the space of empathy that interconnects the participants of the rituals beyond their rational capacity to understand human suffering. The spiritual activism, particularly exercised by Western princesses, can be an alternative to war and militarism built upon a politics of death, or necropolitics. These women lead us to meditate on how to claim and reclaim a politics of life, a politics of empathy in the militarized world.
Thank you.
The question that our topic raised for me, and which I hope will raise questions for you to take us into the discussion, is this: what sustains us for the long journey of resistance, resilience, and creativity? And so I'll talk out of my discipline as a New Testament scholar, as a feminist, and as an eco-feminist. So the first answer that to that question that emerged for me was the way in which I'm sustained by a long line of women who have gone before us in resistance, in resilience, and in creativity. For me, these women go back to the 1st century. the women of the Matthean community in particular that I work with all the time, and other New Testament communities and their stories of women. I'm inspired by the courageous stance of Justa, whom the New Testament names as a Canaanite woman who stood before Jesus with her request for healing for her daughter, stood there until it was granted. I see her today, this foremother, in the face of courageous refugee women of our time who are prepared to risk all for the sake of their children and their future. And the image that I have before me in this most recently is that of the Rohingya women. With Justa stands the woman with the perfumed ointment, whom I have named as Marissa, as names are important in transformative work for justice. Marissa's healing action is to be told in memory of her, a phrase we know well from the early 80s and Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza's groundbreaking book by that title. These women, and many others from the emergence of early Christianity, stand as foremothers. I've worked with them, learnt their stories, and stand with them in strength in the long line of women like us. We stand now almost at the end of that long line. Women who were characterized by resistance, by resilience, and by creativity. The question this may raise for us: who are our foremothers, past and present now, who sustain us on the journey? An act of sustenance for the journey, as well as of resistance, is our ongoing engagement in shared projects or even individual projects in our field of biblical and religious studies. These manifest that there are alternate ways of being engaged in our disciplines. For me as a biblical scholar, one such project which comes to mind to demonstrate this is the Wisdom Commentary series, which is currently being edited by Barbara Reed and engaging a wide range of feminist biblical scholarship. The goal of the editors and publishers is to have a feminist commentary on each book of the Bible. It will stand beside and hopefully critique other major commentary series, proclaiming and demonstrating that there is an urgent alternative to mainstream biblical interpretation. There will be, no doubt, other equivalent types of projects within religious studies. I don't know that, but I see that often appearing in the Journal for the Feminist Studies in Religion. And alongside these major projects across our disciplines stands the research undertaken by feminist scholars, among whom diversity is a key to its richness. Diversity of ethnicity and nationality, of academic discipline and approaches, and many more categories, and we've already seen that as we've introduced ourselves today. But I think that diversity is very, very significant in our acts of resistance. We are united, however, in our resistance to disciplines and approaches within disciplines that exclude women and that support approaches which are exclusive not only of women, but of other minority groups. And now we would also recognise exclusive of Earth itself. Again, you may wish in your discussion to identify the ways in which majority voices are being heard in your discipline or sub-discipline as women speak resistance, but also shape the new. Mary identified in her setting the theme for this session an area to which we don't always give sufficient significance, and that is creativity. I really liked that notion of creativity and how significant that is in relation to resistance itself. It will not only underpin our interpretive work, but also sustain us for the long journey that we are on. This creativity will enable us to see and develop new areas of resistance and of resilience. I'm conscious in my own field of feminist biblical studies that my interpretive lens have shifted to include the ecological, so that I would speak now of an ecofeminist lens that guides my interpretation. But even as I say that and as I wrote it, I found that I'm also aware that ecofeminism is not new and doesn't belong to us. Here too we have foremothers such as Rachel Carson, Val Plumwood, and Anne Primavisa, to name but three from out of the myriads. We are learning ever so slowly that Earth, with its constituents and its processes, is woven into and through our texts and our religious traditions, and is so often ignored by us because our dominant focus is on the human. In a sense now, I would hear the cry of the earth, as well as the cry of women and all those who are marginalised. We are challenged to a new creativity, however, that will enable us to hear the voice of earth, to develop a hermeneutic lens that allows us to hear women and men, earth and their interrelationships within our texts and traditions. You may wish to share in your discussion groups how your discipline makes space for such attention to earth and to the creativity which will enable us to address increased sexism, racism, xenophobia, refugees, wars, and systematic injustice that was in Mary's title. Foremothers, ancient and new, and minority voices, one of which is earth, are places of resilience, of resistance, and creativity within a world that is deeply troubled. Our feminist or ecofeminist engagement in religion and theology are needed more than ever before to be such voices. Thank you.
I'm very grateful to Elizabeth and Mary to have the chance to be with you, and I'm going to pass these cards around, and I ask you to take one, and I've got a question for you about halfway in. This is part of an ongoing research project that I'm doing, and if you're willing to share your answers with me, I would love it, and if not, that's completely fine. But if you'll just take a card, and you'll find out soon enough what it is, the question, and why I think it's so important for us to deal with today. Oh, friends and colleagues, this is what is at stake in our world today. We are in a struggle for the very soul of democracy. And all that we hold dear, interdependence, reason, compassion, respect for all human beings, and stewardship of the natural world that sustains us, is under direct and unabashed assault. We are experiencing a rise in authoritarianism in the United States that is as dangerous as the anti-communism of the McCarthy era of the 1950s. It is potentially as deadly as the eradication of basic civil and economic rights for African Americans following the Reconstruction period after the Civil War. We are also witnessing a resurgence of authoritarianism in Europe, not seen since the rise of fascism in the 1930s. Now, within the world of political science, there is a well-established analysis of what activates authoritarianism at times like these, of increasing economic, political, and environmental threat. Now, this is where you're going to help me, because this analysis is both challenging in what it discloses, but profoundly evocative in what it fails to see. Now, first, what it discloses. According to many political scientists, there is a significant proportion of the human population, this is worldwide, not just the United States, that remains authoritarian, around 25%. there is also a larger subset of the population whose authoritarianism is episodic, not constitutive, and it's evoked under conditions of both normative threat and what many of us would see as positive social change. Now, both forms are on the rise throughout the world, and the verdict of one leading political scientist is grim. Karen Stinner, who is the author of The Authoritarian Dynamic, argues that gains in civil rights, equality for women, for people who are LGBTQI, more rights for those with disabilities, increasing racial, cultural, and religious diversity will inevitably produce authoritarianism. She goes so far as to conclude that the pace of social change must be curtailed, and that democracy itself has to be limited in order to survive, and she challenges us to forego the religion of democracy for the science of democracy. Now, while this political science is clear in its diagnosis, it is also fundamentally flawed and intrinsically limited. And here is our hope, and here is our task. There are two significant flaws in this research. The first, authoritarianism is measured not by political beliefs, but by child-rearing values that are then correlated with specific political positions. And before I proceed further, I'm going to ask you to join me in an experiment. And this is one of the note cards. What are 4 child-rearing values that you think are most important? 4 values to be conveyed to children that you think are the most important. Write those down, and then I'll tell you about the research, both. And as I read them, I want you to listen and see if they've left anything out, if you have any values that aren't even on these scales. So this is the first. This is the first scale, and it's utilized by Karen Stinner in her research. So these are the choices: obeying one's parents, or thinking for oneself, respecting elders, or following one's conscience, following the rules, or exercising good judgment, being well-mannered, or being responsible for one's own actions, being neat and clean, or being interested in how and why things happen. Now, here's the second scale, and this is utilized by Mark Hetherington and Jonathan Weiler. And again, the choice is you have to choose one or the other. Respect for elders, independence. Obedience, self-reliance. Good manners, curiosity. Well-behaved, considerate. Now, do you notice anything missing? Anyone have any values that weren't on either of these lists? Can you just, what?
Resilience.
Resilience. Integrity.
Imagination.
Imagination. Honesty.
Love.
Love. Love. Anything else?
Compassion.
Compassion. Yeah, courage. What? Honesty. Sharing. Yeah. Oh, what was I didn't hear the other one? Diligence. Yeah. Respect. Respect for all forms of life. Okay, look, this is one of the things I think. I've been asking this from audiences in the United States since 2016, and the results are very similar to what you were doing here, because you'll notice what's missing in these choices are our attitudes toward other people, right? So respect for all forms of life, love. What's missing is cooperation, service, and then what you find is also what is set in opposition are values that actually sustain each other. I remember asking my daughters the same, Chris, and my daughter, who's oldest, is the most independent person I know. She teaches not just yoga, but paddleboard yoga, and she teaches Groove 3 hip-hop classes. And when I asked her to choose between respect for elders or independence, she immediately said respect for elders. Because how else would I have independence? Right? So, and again, I've said either considerate or well-mannered. Well, I don't know about you, but the way I was raised is the reason you're well-mannered is because you're considerate, right? That they go together. So one of the things that what we see in most of these scales is they have nothing to do with our attitudes toward others. And Stinner even sets it up that our choice is cohesive community that's based on obedience and uniformity. So cohesion requires obedience and uniformity, or progress that's grounded in individual freedom and creativity. And there's nothing about individual creativity expressed in helping others. You know, being curious, finding better and new ways of helping other people, or in working for others for common goals. Now, one of the things that we find in this research is that Stinner says we've got to choose. You either have authoritarianism, cohesive, rule-bound community, or libertarianism, free-wheeling individualism. And missing from this choice is what many of us know as feminists and womanists and mujeristas, is the desire for not just independence, generative interdependence. Right? A community that fully values both diversity and connection, that nurtures creativity and scientific rigor, that embodies both responsibility for others, we care about others, and yet the freedom to find new and better ways of living out that responsibility. So the real choice is that of a cohesive communal order based on creativity and collective problem solving, or a cohesive communal order based on hierarchy, violence, control, and sameness. And the tendency to divide community based on us against them is not benign, it's not inevitable, and it can be resolutely opposed. Now, I would think you will see here as well, there's another second fundamental flaw in this research. I have yet to find any study that systematically breaks down people's responses to this, of authoritarianism or libertarianism, that takes into account race. And I would wonder if we would find in peoples of color more of a resistance to either the cohesive community based on uniformity, or one on interdependence. And on free-wheeling individualism, but more one of really genuine interdependence, that we are stronger because we're together, rather than either us or them. So at this moment in history, this is our chance. This is our chance to combat authoritarianism by living out cohesive communities of generative interdependence, not just resistance, right? But a kind of in creating a different way of being together. And as we do this, we are saying no. We are saying no to hatred. We are saying no in our votes, no in our laws, and no in our policies. But yet it is vital to remember that our no to hatred, our no to fear and violence is grounded in a deep, generative, and expansive yes. A yes to difference, a yes to the richness of diversity, to the gift of reason, to the joy of cooperation, and to the deep soul satisfaction of compassion. This work is ours, it is our challenge, it is our gift, it is our blessing. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our three speakers. I think we've had three very different and in many ways overlapping approaches to our issue. Now, the time has come for us to form small groups, which will hopefully take people out of their comfort zones and the people they came with, or those from their own countries or settings or disciplines. So if you'd mix it up a little bit, We will take 15 minutes, and that's all we have, 15 minutes, to have a conversation with each other. And I would like to suggest that the focus of the conversation be not only sharing the experiences of resistance and resilience, but also, more importantly, to focus on creativity. What does it take to really make something happen that gets noticed, that makes change, and that moves issues forward? So let's focus on the we only have 15 minutes. Let's focus on the creativity part and then come back in our plenary to see what some of those actions might be. So I will call time in 15 minutes, but mix it up here so that you don't sit with people that you came with or that you already know. And please thank our speakers once again for this enjoyment. About how we might continue this discussion, especially in our session next year. We'd be happy to hear those too. But mostly it's to hear some creative ideas. So if you'd say your name and give us just a snippet. This is, again, brief but synthetic comments about the kinds of things that you found helpful in terms of this kind of resistance, resiliency, and creativity. The floor is open. Please, go
I've
ahead.
heard the most extraordinary story, but I mean, I've heard it. Should I be telling it?
I don't know
Or
what
one
to
who
help you there.
told the story about the Baha'i in Iran being refused education. So what they did was set up a university, which isn't based anywhere, but it's everywhere. And even Muslim people are contributing to it, and they put themselves at enormous risk. But I found that marvelous creativity that cuts across and gets to the heart of it and does something very positive.
And could be replicated.
Could be replicated, yeah, in all sorts of ways.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
Like, it inspired in me a thought, and another little comment that I heard in the same group. We have an Indian company, we're threatened with an Indian company setting up one of the biggest coal mines in the world at this point in history in Queensland, in Australia. Now, just the example of establishing a community of people actually being there and living there. I don't know how you do it, but apparently something like that happened in Germany.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Let's go to another part of the room over here. Yes.
Thanks. So ours wasn't a creative idea, but it was, we were wrestling with this idea of how to find space for creativity within current systems of oppression, and particularly thinking about the sort of like financial aspect of that. So how do you find creative spaces, cultivate creative practices within systems of limited assets or poverty?
Yeah, and that really does push the question of fundraising and what it means to develop alternative forms of giving and cultivating alternative streams of revenue. That could be a very exciting topic for people to take on. Yeah, let's go over here. Yeah. Not in our group. Anyone? Someone else? What? Yeah, go ahead.
Well,
Sure.
we talked about the creativity. You got into the topic of rage and how anger can be so debilitating, or it can be active. And we talked about creativity in using creativity to process rage, and the concept of lamenting and lamentations, and also bringing God or the divine into our rage to move it into action through creativity.
Yeah, James.
We talked about the opportunity to operationalize continued conversation on violence against women at Parliament of World Religions Women Assembly and the work that Faith Trust Institute does, and talked about bringing forth, again, the national declaration that we put forth in 1995, but lifting that up with new eyes, perhaps around sexual assault as well, to capture what's happening today in the world.
Yeah, we were commenting earlier that if people had listened to the Faith Trust Institute 40 years ago, we wouldn't be dealing with the things we're dealing with on a regular basis, especially in the public. Really, it's a disgrace when you think about it. The resources that are there to be used. You people must, your stock is split. You people are sad to say. Sad to say. But I think about that. But the Faith Trust and the Parliament is a great combo.
Yes.
Yeah,
Very
great.
interesting how to activate.
Yeah, and to use that forum as a place to do that work, yeah.
Daniela has something.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So we looked at the relation between resilience and creativity. So resilience was the theme this morning, and now creativity. And so we use this image of when you dance, you use the resistance of the floor to dance even better, to get more that movement. And so how to use the resistance of situation we are facing to be more creative and more resilient.
We were saying too in this group that with reference to especially Elaine's comment about Earth and how this work is exponentially more difficult now than it was when some of us started 40 years ago and more. Wouldn't you say, Sharon, exponentially more difficult? Yeah. More complicated and more challenging. Yes.
I was talking about the bishops and saying how what they were talking about regarding the same-sex marriage debate, and how they were using the same thing that Sharon was talking about, dichotomous arguments they were looking at, and how we were discussing how they were talking about how it was going to affect traditional marriage if same-sex couples marry, and what was the other one? The
education of your children.
The education of your children was going to be compromised because they'd be hearing about things that they shouldn't be hearing about at school, and it was going to open their minds to things that they shouldn't be hearing about at school. So there was, but then we were also talking about how the same-sex marriage survey, and we were talking about what Elaine was saying about diversity, because in Sydney, the suburbs around the harbour are probably the wealthier suburbs, and they
Greater Rose Bay, as it were.
Yeah, Rose Bay, and have diversity, but probably more same-sex couples and more educated people, and they all voted yes. But once you got out into the western suburbs of Sydney, where that's where a lot of the migration and there's ethnic groups, they all voted no. So we were saying that they are probably more ethnically diverse, and a lot of migrants in those areas. And I made the comment that they came to Australia to have liberty, but they voted against other people's liberty. So it's interesting. It was just interesting the way that it played out. But it did come back. What was it?
61, 39.
Yeah. Yes.
But diversity, the problem is that diversity in itself, it just depends what sort of diversity.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not necessarily creative, unfortunately.
Yeah. It doesn't guarantee anything.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Other
doing this, but I just heard about it. People making donations to Planned Parenthood in honor of anti-choice politicians.
Yeah.
And
curious defense.
And then and then all of that then gets sent to all those people. So they have all this mail coming to them from Planned Parenthood because we're making donations, in their name, which I thought was cool. And I think we need to think about more of those kinds of, kind of in your face, funny, but criterias and how to sort of turn things on their heads to just aggravate politicians and let them know that, because when we write to them and say, please vote against it, they just send that form letter back, and they don't pay attention. But I think this is at least one way to say, we're watching and not agreeing.
Yeah, it's a good strategy. I must say I've done it myself over the years when places have disinvited me to send money in their name to the group that they would hate the most. Send them a letter saying, sure, thank you so much. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I heard about this independent bookstore in regards to community building and creating a safe space, which is what people need to recover from trauma. There's this community, and actually I heard on CBC Radio in Canada, which is like a public radio, out in Cape Cod, where this like community kind of bookstore only can really survive during the tourist season. So what they started doing is that they implemented crop share ideology, and they started, this bookstore owner started asking her the people who come there to start buying shares for the next, throughout the whole year. So they would maybe donate $500 worth of books, or 1,000, or even like 100, to sustain the community center of this independent bookstore that fights against the more macro, like I guess it's Barnes and Nobles here, or like we call Chapters, or Amazon, to create a unique space for that community and their heritage. And I thought, wow, that's a really cool way to almost like, I'm a teacher, so it's like cross-curricular, to take something like farming and implement it into, a bookstore, right? A creative way of connecting and resisting at the same time.
Perfect. Anybody else? Do you leave with any hope? Any new ideas? Is it as bad as we think?